In the pantheon of American heroes, few names command instant recognition like Chuck Norris. The internet may have transformed him into a meme, but behind the jokes lies a story so profound, so marked by both extraordinary triumph and devastating loss, that it redefines what we think we know about strength itself. This is the man who faced Bruce Lee in cinematic combat, the Texas Ranger who became a household name, the martial artist whose very presence seemed to promise that justice would prevail. Yet beneath the iron exterior that captivated millions beats the heart of someone who has endured unimaginable pain, watching helplessly as war claimed his brother, as illness consumed his beloved wife, and as time itself became his most relentless opponent. Today, at 85, Chuck Norris carries both the weight of legend and the burden of profound sorrow. His story isn't just one of fame and fortune, it's a testament to how a human soul can be simultaneously unbreakable and completely shattered. Before we journey through the remarkable chapters of his life, if Chuck Norris has ever meant something to you, show your respect by hitting that like button. This is a story that deserves to be told with the honor it merits. The legend began in the most unlikely place, a broken home in Ryan, Oklahoma, where Carlos Ray Norris entered the world in 1940. But this wasn't the origin story of a destined hero. Instead, it was the beginning of a nightmare that would haunt a young boy for years to come. Ray Norris, Chuck's father, returned from World War II, carrying invisible wounds that alcohol only made deeper. The family had once received word that he was missing in action, a telegram that shattered their world before he eventually returned. But the man who came home was forever changed. The war had stolen something essential from him, replacing it with a rage that turned their house into a battlefield. Chuck would later recall in his memoir how his father became everything he vowed never to become, a man whose presence brought fear rather than comfort. Wilma Norris, Chuck's mother, became the family's sole source of strength, often hiding precious dollars for food, only to watch helplessly as her husband discovered and claimed them for drink. The terror wasn't confined to quiet moments. There were nights when Ray, consumed by alcohol and fury, would force the entire family into their car, declaring his intention to drive them all back to Arizona. These harrowing journeys, with Wilma sobbing and pleading as the vehicle weaved dangerously across dark roads, carved permanent scars into young Chuck's memory. Poverty stalked them relentlessly. Chuck found his only heroes in the Saturday matinee cowboys, though he could rarely afford the dime admission. In those brief escapes into fantasy, he dreamed of strength and honor, qualities that seemed impossibly distant from his daily reality. The breaking point arrived when Chuck was 14. In a moment that would define his character forever, he positioned himself between his terrorized mother and his violent father, gripping a hammer with trembling hands but unwavering determination. This confrontation between a desperate child and a man consumed by demons became the moment Chuck silently promised himself he would never become the source of such fear. When Chuck turned 16, Wilma finally gathered the courage to flee to California with her 3 sons, leaving behind a husband lost to his darkness and a past too painful to endure. She became the pillar that held them together when everything else crumbled, the light that convinced Chuck there was hope beyond the shadows of his childhood. These early years didn't just wound Chuck, they forged him. The scars ran deep, but they also created an inner strength that would one day transform a frightened boy into the man the world would call invincible. Escaping to California offered freedom from his father's violence, but Chuck still carried the emotional wreckage of his childhood. In 1958, at 18, he made a decision that would reshape his destiny, enlisting in the United States Air Force. His assignment to South Korea brought him face to face with something that would change everything: martial arts. The shy, withdrawn teenager who had felt invisible in high school found himself drawn to the disciplined world of Taekwondo and Judo. His initial attempts were clumsy and awkward, but something deeper stirred within him. A recognition that this path could transform weakness into strength, fear into confidence. On the training mats of Osan Air Base, Chuck fell repeatedly, his body aching from constant practice. Yet he always rose again, driven by an aching determination never to feel powerless again. Years later, he would reflect on this period. Martial arts gave him an identity when he had none, a reason to believe in himself when everything else suggested he should give up. Returning to California in 1962, Chuck carried more than military discipline. He possessed a burning obsession with martial arts that would define his future. He became a military police officer while opening his first karate school, a modest storefront where he taught a handful of students while struggling to pay rent. The early days were heartbreaking. The dojo often echoed with emptiness, his footsteps the only sound as he swept mats and waited for students who sometimes never arrived. Money was scarce, doubts were loud, but his belief never wavered. He was fighting for more than survival. He was fighting to forge a future. His first tournament experiences were devastating. Crushing defeats left him bruised and humbled, cruel reminders of childhood powerlessness. But instead of surrendering, Chuck returned to the dojo night after night, drilling every technique until his body became a weapon, sharpened not by natural talent, but by pure willpower. Between 1964 and 1967, the setbacks were painful, but they hammered him into something unbreakable. Then, in 1967, at age 27, Chuck captured his first major championship. What followed was extraordinary. 6 consecutive years as professional middleweight karate champion. But his rise wasn't measured in trophies alone. He established multiple karate schools across America, teaching more than techniques. He taught respect, perseverance, and inner strength. Values that inspired countless students who, like him, were searching for ways to rise above their hardships. Every defeat had hurt, but each pushed him closer to the man he wanted to become. He realized that losing was only permanent if you quit, and quitting wasn't in his vocabulary. What began as the desperate dream of a frightened boy had become living reality, built strike by strike, day by day. Chuck's transition from martial arts champion to Hollywood icon wasn't immediate or easy. His breakthrough came in 1972, when destiny placed him opposite Bruce Lee in Way of the Dragon. Their legendary fight scene in Rome's Colosseum became more than cinema. It was the clash of titans that introduced Chuck to the world. Though audiences gasped at every exchange, Chuck carried a haunting fear that history might remember him only as the man Bruce Lee defeated. Instead, what could have been humiliation became his springboard to greatness. Audiences didn't forget his intensity or presence, and Hollywood couldn't ignore this new force. But success wasn't guaranteed. The late 1970s found Chuck navigating Hollywood's brutal landscape, competing with giants like Stallone and Schwarzenegger, while his early films struggled to find their footing. He fought not with fists, but with patience and relentless perseverance to prove his vision belonged. The breakthrough came in 1978 with Good Guys Wear Black. At 38, Chuck finally struck the chord America had been waiting for, embodying the clean-cut, disciplined hero a restless nation longed to see. The roles multiplied with punishing momentum. The Octagon, Lone Wolf McQuade, Missing in Action, Code of Silence, and The Delta Force. Each film solidified him not merely as a martial arts star, but as a living symbol of rugged patriotism and unwavering justice. Yet every triumph was laced with sorrow too deep for applause to erase. Each time he wore a soldier's uniform or stepped into battle scenes, memories of his brother Wieland flooded back with devastating force. Through the 1980s, Chuck cemented himself as America's action hero. His calm, steady presence reassured a nation longing for heroes. Behind the camera, however, he faced different battles. Exhausting schedules, injuries from stunts, and the toll of months away from family. In 1993, at 53, a new chapter began that would immortalize him forever. Walker, Texas Ranger. For 8 seasons until 2001, Chuck embodied Cordell Walker, whose unwavering morality became household symbols across America and beyond. The series reached over 100 countries, transforming Chuck into a global icon synonymous with strength and honor. Children looked up to him as an unbeatable hero. Adults admired his calm discipline. Even as parodies spread across pop culture, they only magnified his influence. Yet even at this pinnacle, fame couldn't erase grief or silence memory. Beneath the spotlight lurked shadows of every loss and sacrifice that had paved his path to glory. Behind every uniform Chuck wore on screen lay a personal battlefield where war had claimed someone he loved beyond measure. His younger brother Wieland had always been the family's vibrant spirit, carrying laughter into rooms darkened by their father's struggles. But he also carried a haunting premonition, once whispering that he didn't believe he'd live to see 27. Those words seemed like youthful melancholy until 1970, when they became merciless prophecy. While serving in Vietnam at just 21, Wieland was walking point on patrol when he spotted enemy forces lying in wait. In that critical instant, he shouted a warning to save his comrades, sacrificing his own life in an act of staggering courage. The telegram that followed shattered the Norris family. Their mother, who had already shepherded her children through poverty and violence, now faced the unbearable cruelty of outliving her son. Chuck later confessed that this loss carved a wound in his soul that time could never mend. Throughout the 1980s, as his films filled theaters worldwide and audiences roared for his victories, Chuck lived a private tragedy that never loosened its grip. Each costume, each rifle he carried for roles, each staged battle pulled him back to that cruel moment when war reached into his family and tore away a brother who should have had his whole life ahead. The staged firefights, shouted commands, and chaos of explosions on screen weren't just acting, they were reliving Wieland's ghost. The merciless truth was that war hadn't only killed a young soldier in distant jungle, but had stolen peace from every day of Chuck's life that followed. Wieland's death became the silent burden Chuck carried into every triumph, the shadow behind every smile. He had faced childhood bullies, endured poverty, and fought through humiliating martial arts defeats. But nothing compared to losing the brother who had stood beside him in that same broken home. For Chuck, Wieland wasn't simply a sibling, he was part of his own being, torn away on a battlefield thousands of miles from home, leaving emptiness that applause could never fill. Yet in that abyss of grief, Chuck found fragile but unbreakable strength. If Wieland could give his life protecting others, then Chuck couldn't surrender to despair. His films became more than entertainment. They became living tributes to his brother. Each character testified to resilience, discipline, and courage. Audiences saw invincible strength, but what they truly witnessed was brotherly love forged into steel, grief transformed into purpose. Wieland's sacrifice never stopped hurting, never stopped haunting, but it shaped Chuck into the man the world would revere. He proved that even legends bleed, even heroes grieve, and some wounds remain open forever no matter how much glory surrounds them. If war had stolen his brother on distant battlefield, another heartbreak would strike closer to home. Not with gunfire's roar, but with love's quiet collapse. In 1958, 18-year-old Chuck married his high school sweetheart, Diane Holacek. For 3 decades, their union anchored his storm-tossed life. They built a family together, raising sons Mike, born 1962, and Eric, born 1965, children who would watch their father rise from karate champion to Hollywood icon. But fame proved ungentle. Relentless film schedules, constant travel, and invisible weight of secrets pressed down on their marriage until it could bear no more. In 1988, after 30 years, their bond shattered. For Chuck, who had endured so many battles, this was a different kind of wound. The devastating shock of losing the foundation he'd trusted for half his life. The separation left him adrift, stripped of companionship he'd grown to rely on. This wasn't enemy ambush, but broken home silence that brought him to his knees. Knowing his sons witnessed their family's unraveling cut even deeper. As if that loss wasn't enough, another revelation arrived like a ghost from the past. A letter from a young woman named Dina, born in 1962, revealed she was his daughter from a brief relationship during military service. For 26 years, she'd lived her entire childhood without him, her mother keeping the truth hidden to avoid disrupting his marriage. Reading her words at 48, reeling from divorce was both undeniable and unbearable. Chuck saw himself in her face, and with that recognition came crushing guilt. His faith had taught him the weight of fidelity and responsibility. Now he felt branded by absence's shame, by years he could never reclaim. He reached out to Dina and her mother with humility, seeking forgiveness. But no contrition could erase haunting questions of what might have been if he'd been present through her childhood. While Dina became a blessing in his life, he couldn't escape regret for lost years. Regret that lingered even as their bond strengthened. This was a different scar, carved not by violence or war, but by choices, silence, and time's merciless passage. For the man who'd built his legend on invincibility, these revelations stripped away armor, revealing a father's fragile heart, one that had failed and could only hope to heal through honesty and love. As if fate hadn't tested him enough with his brother's death and marriage's collapse, another cruel blow awaited. This time in friendship, in the rare bond of trust he'd found beyond blood. In the late 1980s, Chuck formed a deep connection with Lee Atwater, the brilliant strategist whose sharp mind and boundless energy seemed unshakable. They were unlikely friends, one a martial arts icon, the other a rising political star. But they shared easy camaraderie, nights of conversation and laughter, the kind of trust only true friends know. Then in March 1990, the unthinkable struck. While delivering a speech, Lee suddenly collapsed before a shocked audience. Within hours came the devastating verdict: an inoperable brain tumor. He was only 39, his career soaring, his future seemingly stretching decades ahead. In one moment, everything was torn away. For Chuck, hearing those words was like watching ground crumble beneath his feet. He'd seen death on battlefields through his brother, but this was different. A friend, vibrant and brilliant, suddenly staring down fate no warrior could fight. Over the following months, Chuck visited Lee, and what he witnessed seared into memory. The once unstoppable man whose voice had filled rooms was reduced to whispers, bright eyes dimming, youthful energy fading as illness consumed him. Chuck later described one particular visit when he leaned down, kissed his friend's forehead, then walked out and broke down, overwhelmed by the cruelty of watching someone so alive unravel so quickly. In March 1991, just 1 year after his collapse, Lee Atwater died at 40. For Chuck, it wasn't only losing a friend, but the collapse of illusion that strength, charisma, even brilliance could shield anyone from mortality. The chilling realization that it could happen to anyone stripped away the last layers of invincibility he'd believed in. This was when Chuck, whom millions thought indestructible, came face to face with life's fragility. The applause, trophies, and fame seemed fleeting in the shadow of a casket lowered far too soon. For someone who'd built his legend on endurance and triumph, Lee's death was a mirror showing him that time is merciless and life heartbreakingly fragile. Yet even in grief, Chuck drew from his friend's memory a deeper resolve to live with purpose, to cherish those he loved, to understand that true strength wasn't about never falling, but about valuing every moment before it slipped away. If losing his brother had scarred him, if losing his marriage had shaken him, and if losing his friend had forced him to face mortality, nothing compared to the day he realized his greatest battle would be fought, not on screen or in rings, but at his beloved wife's bedside. After years of loneliness, Chuck found happiness again when he met Gina O'Kelly, a former model 23 years younger. They married in 1998 when he was 58. In 2001, they welcomed twins Dakota and Danilee, and for more than a decade, their home filled with children's laughter and the peace Chuck had long craved. By 2013, Chuck was 73 and Gina 52. Their family seemingly blessed with second chances at happiness. Then came the cruelest twist of all. That year, Gina underwent what should have been routine MRI scans, with contrast dye meant to safeguard her health. Instead, it delivered devastation. The gadolinium used triggered what doctors would later recognize as gadolinium deposition disease, a cruel, little-known condition that besieged her nervous system. Shortly after the scans, she began suffering terrifying symptoms. Her body trembled uncontrollably. Her limbs weakened and grew numb. Even her voice faltered until words became nearly impossible. The woman Chuck adored, the mother of his young children, was suddenly slipping into a nightmare neither could escape. Doctors searched for answers while each day seemed worse than the last. There were countless nights when Chuck sat by her hospital bed, holding her hand as machines hummed around them, watching helplessly as she fought to speak, while her once bright smile dimmed into silence. More than $2 million poured into treatments, but no sum could buy back the simple peace of seeing her whole and healthy again. In interviews, Chuck would later admit those years broke him in ways the world couldn't see. To fans, he remained the indestructible hero of Walker, Texas Ranger. But at home, he was only a husband in despair. He gave up films, public appearances, and the career that had defined him for decades, retreating from spotlights to devote every moment to her side. Hollywood lost an icon, but Gina gained a guardian who refused to let go for even a heartbeat. The ordeal weighed on everyone. For Gina, once healthy and radiant, losing independence was crushing. She watched the man she loved sacrifice everything for her, her suffering deepened by guilt of knowing his career and life had been set aside. For the twins, only 12 at the time, childhood was forever marked by hospital visits and the haunting image of their mother in pain. The years that followed were relentless trials, experimental treatments, long hospital stays, journeys across continents searching for answers, even desperate trips to China for stem cell therapy. Each setback threatened to crush their spirits, yet Chuck refused to surrender. The discipline forged in dojos now fueled a far more sacred fight to keep hope alive when medicine faltered. He became not the warrior on screen, but the warrior at home, measuring victory not in trophies, but in love's endurance. Through it all, the world began seeing a different Chuck Norris. Stripped of invincibility's armor, he revealed strength's truest form. Not the kind that defeats enemies, but the kind that kneels beside suffering loved ones and whispers, "I'm not leaving." At 85, Chuck Norris lives a life that appears serene on the surface, yet beneath that quiet lies decades accumulated weight, memories and battles that never truly end. He resides with Gina on their sprawling Navasota, Texas ranch, a sanctuary of hundreds of acres worth tens of millions where the family raises horses and bottles. Sea Forest, the spring water Chuck transformed into both business and legacy. The ranch stretches vast with still lakes and open skies where every sunrise seems to whisper of peace. Yet for Chuck, each step along dirt paths carries echoes of all he's endured. Beyond the ranch, he maintains other properties, including a Dallas area residence. His fortune is estimated at $70 million, testament to decades of martial arts triumphs, blockbuster films, television stardom, and ventures beyond the screen. But measuring Chuck Norris by numbers misunderstands him entirely. Wealth can buy land and homes, even medical treatments, but cannot purchase back time or erase shadows that return each night to sit with him in silence. His days revolve around Gina, who continues bearing lasting scars from her health crisis. Though she's found stability after years of pain, Chuck remains constantly at her side, vigilant and tender, as if every moment together could vanish without warning. Their twins, Dakota and Danilee, born in 2001, are now 24. Young adults shaped not by red carpets and camera flashes, but by solemn reality of their mother's suffering and father's unwavering devotion. For Chuck, their lives are both blessing and mirror, proof that even in worlds marked by sorrow, love grants second chances. But age is a battlefield no warrior can conquer. For someone who once embodied indestructible strength, His body's betrayal is its own heartbreak. Workouts are gentler, martial arts slower, his once iron frame softened by time's hands. Each joint's creak, each frailty reminder feels like cruel echo of the legend he once was. Though Chuck chose to step away from public eyes, there are nights when the ranch's silence weighs heavier than any applause he ever received. The ghosts remain: Wyland, the brother who died in war; Diane, the wife lost to divorce; Dinah, the daughter he couldn't hold through childhood; Lee Atwater, the friend whose life ended too soon; and Gina, whose survival fight etched scars into both their souls. At 85, these memories don't fade, they sharpen, returning in whispers reminding him of everything time has taken. Neither fame nor fortune nor strength could ever shield him from loss's inevitability. The fighter who once faced down villains on screen now wages quieter battles, using his legacy to shape lives before hardship has chance to break them. And so the man the world once saw as unbreakable now lives surrounded by land, by family, and by borrowed time's fragile beauty. His ranch stands as fortress of peace, but his heart carries every scar he ever earned. To the world, Chuck Norris remains a symbol of strength. To his family, he's a guardian, husband, and father who gave up everything for love. And to himself, he's a man who learned that even legends must bow to time, but that dignity, devotion, and love can turn even the darkest years into stories of light. If Chuck Norris has ever inspired you, if his triumphs and tragedies have touched your soul, honor him now with your like. A gesture of respect for a man who has carried not only fame's blazing glory, but also life's heaviest sorrows, and who still stands as proof that love itself is Earth's greatest force.